All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Write Out Loud podcast. It is, of course, Matt Cassem, along with the spirited, sparkling, vivacious, exuberant, lethal, and bright. Yeah. How do you think? What did you think about that?
Sparkling, I'll go with. Sparkling, I appreciate. Give me a little glitter and I'm happy. But still need to get you a thesaurus.
Yeah, we try to find as many different words as possible to describe you.
When someone meets me, they're going to be like so disappointed because I am none of those things.
Nonsense. That is utter nonsense. Anywho, we are back once again and very, very excited to introduce you to a very, very special guest.
Yes.
This is Ruby Dixon, and Ruby is an author of all things science fiction and fantasy romance. She's a Sagittarius and a Raylo shipper for those Star Wars fans out there. Loves farming sims, but not actual housework. And that's something I can absolutely align with. Lives in the South with her husband and a couple of goofy cats. Hello, Ruby.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
We're
very, very excited.
Yes, I was just going to say, this is my pinnacle moment. I am, full disclosure, a huge fan of the Ice Planet Barbarians. And so ever since I read that first one, I have been telling Matt, we've got to get Ruby on. We've got to get Ruby on. So this is exciting for me.
Absolutely. Ruby, tell us a little more about yourself. What would, tell us?
Oh, let me think. Well, I started publishing as Ruby in 2015. That was when Kindle Unlimited was brand new. And I was like, well, I write a lot. So let me throw some stuff into Kindle Unlimited and see how that goes. And it was kind of like the place for the stuff that doesn't fit New York. Shorter things, slightly crazy things, whatever. And it just kind of took off. I don't know. I'm not a very exciting person. I don't have like a big pedigree of like writer colleges. I'm married.
No.
Have some cats.
Yeah, sometimes that's one of the things that I wish more people knew about writing. I don't think it takes any of those things. And in fact, I think it takes someone who is willing to just create, willing to just sit back and go, I've got this idea, and just go with it. I mean, some of the best writers out there literally have pen and imagination, and that's it. And those are some of the best writers out there. I read an article, and I wish I could cite where the article is, but it's somewhere in the internet void, and I've never been able to find it since. But I had heard that you were writing for New York under a different pen name and were just feeling some burnout, and that you had this idea for the Ice Planet Barbarians, and it was kind of sitting in the vault, like untouched.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what some of the burnout you were feeling and why you decided to open that idea again?
So let me think. When I initially started writing, you start out with like, oh, it's an idea that I really want. It's like usually the most cliched story ever. Like I think the first one I started writing was everybody had like purple eyes and like they had special marks on them from the gods, and it's a fantasy.
Yeah.
And you read that later and you're like, this is stupid. But that's many years later. But when you first start writing, nobody's there to tell you can't write something like this. And so that was what I started out with. And then as I tailored myself towards being published more and more, you pay more attention to what the market wants.
Right.
You write the weird out a lot of the time. You become what the editor is looking for, what they think they will sell. And so by the time that I started writing as Ruby, I had written a lot of stuff that I enjoyed writing it because I just enjoy writing, but it wasn't something that I would necessarily like wake up and be like super excited. Oh, I get to write about a billionaire or whatever. You know, it's like it wasn't something that I would like call to me or scream to me, I guess. And so I was like, you know what? I'm really kind of fried. I don't like what is coming out. I felt kind of stalled. So I was like, I'm going to pull through my junk file and just see what calls me. And most writers, or a lot of writers, I shouldn't say most, you get a lot of ideas over and over again. I think either you're a writer that works on one idea at a time, or you're a writer that gets like 20 ideas and you get more of them the deeper you get into the book that you're working on. I'm one of those people that's constantly getting ideas. So what I do is, if the idea sits with me for a couple of days, I have a saying that like, if I think about it and I don't write it down, if I remember it the next day, it was a memorable idea. Whoa. If I don't remember it, it doesn't really matter. Or it wasn't good enough to stick. So if I think about something for a couple of days and I'm like, that could be a book at some point, I make a document and I put all my ideas into the file. And sometimes it becomes a book that I come back to years later, and sometimes it just sits there and rots. And this particular idea was aliens, and it was aliens with a symbiote, and it was a romance. And I liked books about characters getting stranded, and it was initially going to be like, oh, the symbiote gives them superhero powers, which didn't happen. Just because it's in the idea file doesn't mean it actually like ends up staying there.
Sure.
But I wanted the story to be a difficult choice for the heroine, because if you get dropped on like this planet, and this planet's just like, oh, it's paradise, there's coconuts in every tree and there's sunny beaches and it's all beautiful, then it's not hard to be like, should I stay here forever? But if it's like primeval and it's freaking cold all the time and you have to hunt for all your food and there's no Starbucks, it's a harder decision to be like, do I need to stay or am I going to go? It makes that whole mental choice of like, yeah, this guy is awesome, but do I really want to live here sort of mentality. And I wanted that to be something that the reader thinks about too. Like, would I survive there? Or would I be like, nah, somebody can just kill me now. I'm not going to make it here. So that was kind of the fun part for me, was writing through it and being like, okay, how did they get out of this mess? So, and I didn't know where it was going to go. And I ended up making it a serial because I think serials were popular when Kindle Unlimited first started. And I was like, well, I'll see how that works and I'll see how it goes. And by the time I wrote book 3 for Ice Planet Barbarians, everybody was like, we hate the serial. Don't do it. So I switched to doing just the complete book and dropping the complete book. So, but yeah, it was all kind of an experiment just to see what happened. And it ended up being great.
Yeah. And one of the things is that I really felt about the series, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I started reading them, first of all, for someone who doesn't normally read the sci-fi alien sort of thing. I mean, I was a Star Wars fan, but I'm not a sci-fi reader, if you will. But the fact that they were so each book had a different, like, I don't want to say theme to it, but the idea that like, okay, so one of the gals is deaf. And so not only is there the alien language barrier, but then there's the language barrier of communication with the spouse, with the alien. So it seemed to me you gave each of the stories a little unique nugget that really just blossomed and made the stories much deeper. So on the surface, they're great, they're fun, but there was more depth to them than I was expecting. So when you were, when you were going through, did you kind of think, I mean, you had this ship of women. Did you kind of go through and go, okay, I want this one to have this and I want this one to have that? Or was it more as you started writing the series, the ideas started popping in?
They were sketches when I first started writing it, because I knew that the main character, Georgie, is kind of like the template. She's kind of the every girl. So she's the Bella of the Twilight, the self-insert or whatever, because I wanted it to be easy to fall into the story. If you make the character really complicated and difficult, it's on page 1 and you're introducing this whole new world and you're introducing all this other stuff. To me, as a reader, it becomes a lot to keep up with. Yeah. And I was trying to take away any sort of roadblock that would be for people to fall into the story. Like, I also don't use a lot of different words, I guess, not different words. When you read a science fiction book and you open it on page 1 and they give you like this made up title and this made up city and this made up this and that, it's like they drop you in on the deep end. And that always makes me feel very stupid as a reader. Yeah. Like, everybody else got this. Why didn't you? And so when I feel stupid, I tune out. So I did my best to try and keep that out of there. So I start with a sketch. Let me turn this shit back around because I think I wandered off topic. I start with a sketch of the characters. And as I'm writing, I kind of find little aspects to explore. Like, I wanted Liz, I liked that she was mouthy, but I also wanted her to be kind of like the tough girl, the survivalist. And then Tira was one that was like a little sadder, but she had the earpiece. And so she felt like she was more responsible for everyone. So I knew like little bits about them, but the characters really developed as I was writing it. I don't remember what exactly made me decide to make her deaf. Probably because at the time I had just been fitted for hearing aids. I'm hearing disabled or hearing impaired. I don't know the correct term for it. But so I was probably going through something with that and decided what would it look like if you couldn't talk to anybody? Yeah. And really couldn't talk to anybody because, of course, people that are hearing impaired also have sign language. But if nobody speaks sign language, in addition to hearing language, then it's doubly difficult. I always like to try and make things a little difficult for characters just to see how they kind of crawl out of the hole, so to speak.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. I actually really like that you went a little off course there because you actually said how I initially feel reading science fiction. I think that's why sometimes I just avoid it because, you're dumped into this world and you don't know anything and you're trying to learn terms and that bogged down. And I think the Ice Planet Barbarians was the perfect speed for me because you do kind of get into the story and you're given little bits and pieces along the way. First, you learn about the women and what has initially happened to them before they crash. Then they crash and your humor too, the Hoth, not Hoth. Really, because again, a 70s gal growing up with Star Wars, with Empire Strikes Back being on Hoth. So I think there was just enough of the science fiction piece of it that I forgot I was learning it. I forgot that I didn't know this world before. But yeah, I really thought I was going to stop after the first one. Okay, everybody will stop bugging me to read them if I just read the first one. And then I just became a huge fan. So
I get a lot of like, I'm going to pick this up as a joke. And then like somebody will post on social media and I'm 8 books in. It's not a joke anymore.
Nope. Yes, exactly. Well,
one of the things too that Christina had mentioned, and I'm going to reiterate what I understood that you had said. So you correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that she said you did such a fantastic job of in that series is just intricately building that world so that everything kind of expands through each of the books, right? And that you don't feel like there's just so much to discover, right? As it grows, it kind of becomes this larger thing. So I'd love to know a little bit more about the process so that you've got this like larger world that you're building. It's going to span several books, but it's not necessarily the same character, whatever. Like, how does that all come together? How did you make that work?
So I always feel that and maybe this is imposter syndrome, because science fiction and fantasy has primarily been playground for the past 30 years or so. I mean, there are women in there, but I've always felt like as a romance reader, it's always been in the territory of like, oh, the only fantasy women like is with unicorns or something along those lines. So I have always I guess tried to pull back and be like, okay, what do I want in my fantasy? I want it to be accessible because I don't want readers to get lost on page one. Yeah. So I would think about you just kind of mentally spin out for a while. I would go for a ride in my car and be like, okay, what is he wearing? How did he get those clothes? Okay. What, let's say he's wearing leather. Okay. Where did the leather come from? What kind of leather would you wear? Is it from animals? Okay. Is he hunting those? Who is preparing the leather? How often do you get the leather? Is the leather rare? Is it what happens if you spill a drink on your leather? So kind of have to mentally pull apart everything. I actually, in the spinoff of Ice Planet Barbarians, I started to set up an underground culture. And I was like, okay, well, what does that look like? What is it like if you live underground? You probably have vitamin deficiencies because you don't have sunlight. You probably have a very regimented diet. You have probably a very regimented lifestyle if you're living in a city that's been there for say 1,000 years. What do they eat? What do they drink? How do they get clothes if they're not going to the surface? So it was all kind of things that I had to think about, and you just kind of build from there. And I would create a file and write all this information in, and then I would forget the file exists and never look at it again. But as long as I wrote it down, it felt like it kind of anchored it in my mind. And so I might have the ideas for everything, but I'm only showing the reader one or two pieces that the character is seeing. And it helps to write in first person because that character only knows what they know. They only recognize what they recognize. So if I might know that this yellow fabric is made from mushrooms that are dried and pounded, and the stalk is very woodsy. And so then they weave it like cotton or linen, but the reader doesn't care about that because the heroine just sees yellow cloth. So you kind of have to pull it back. And first person really is the best way it's cheat mode. They only know what they know. Sure. It's like the iceberg where you only see the tip, but there's the big old boulder underneath.
Yeah.
I'm trying to gesture awesome. Like an iceberg.
Yeah. But to me, I think that's one of the things that makes the writing oh God, how do you, I'm not finding my words. When the reader is reading it, we feel the depth, but like you said, we don't know the depth. And I think that's one of the things that makes the characters so real is the fact that it's so real with you and that you've created this whole world and using your iceberg, this whole depth that we don't see because we're just at the surface with the tip of the iceberg. But there's so much more to it that I mean, I think that's one of the things that I hear most often from writers is how much actual thinking and working on that kind of stuff. And even though it's not written into the book, like you said, she doesn't know it's made from. She doesn't know that, but it makes it feel real. And I think if the author believes that it's real, that comes across the reader. Just somehow knowing that the character, I mean, there are some books that I've read that you're like, okay, this character is so two-dimensional. I don't know anything about them. And I often wonder, did the writer actually know anything about the character or did they just imply it to? So just hearing you talk about the depth of stuff that we don't read in the books, it shows me again how much depth there is to them. Because later on, if you do write about the mushroom made shirts, it's going to make sense because it was made from mushrooms from the beginning, but you just didn't bring it in until book 10. So
and I always try to think a couple of books ahead, like, oh, it'd be really exciting if X, Y, and Z happened. And I try to save myself a couple aces in the hole for like, it's getting kind of boring. What can I do in the next book to really shake it up? And then I might cave the mountain in.
I was just going to say.
Throw everything, start over.
Yes.
There was a saying that like, if your book gets boring, have a man enter with a gun. So, and I forget who said that. I want to say Hemingway, but I bet it was not. That's the kind of, I find that interesting from a writing perspective. I don't know how it comes across to readers, but from the writer, it's kind of fun. You'd be like, oh, if we blow it all up.
Yeah. Well, as much as I can talk about Ice Planet Barbarians all day, I do know that there are other books that you've written, other universes. So can we just enter into Rubyverse for just one moment?
Sure.
At what point did you think to yourself, okay, Ice Planet Barbarians are great, but I want to write something more. I want to do something more. And also, I have to wonder if the success played a part in that. Like, it gave you the freedom to try another thing that you hadn't been expecting, or talk a little bit about that piece of it.
When Ice Planet Barbarians started to do well, I had other books that I had written that were sitting in the trunk, basically. Fire in His Blood was one of them. It was a book that I had written way back in the day, and I had pitched it to my then editor, not Cindy. And she was like, oh, dragon romance. Thanks, but no thanks, you know? And so I was like, okay, fine. It's just not right for this world, I guess. And then after Ruby started to get successful, I was like, wait, this is the same sort of like slightly scary, monstery, protective hero who was very secretly soft for the heroine.
Right.
And with the kind of world. And I was like, I bet Ruby's fans would like this. So I self-published that one, and it did really well. So it's like, it was more like, okay, Ruby's fans are with me on this. We're on the same wave. I can try some weird stuff and see what goes out here. And so it was kind of freeing in that, like, oh, maybe I'll pull out this idea for like a prison planet and see what I can do with that. And it's a lot of fun too, because it doesn't have to be a full-length novel when you self-publish it. It can be the story can be as long as it needs to be. I've written some that are like 25,000 words, and I'm like, you know what, that's good. I don't ever have to come back to it. I'm happy with what I did. And there's some that I've self-published that ended up being like 180,000 words. And I could have, kept on going, which is like a book and a half, maybe 2 books. Yeah. And I put it all in one book because I'm like, no, it's all one story. So that's one thing that I really like about self-publishing, is that you can just be like, this story is going to be what it's going to be. And I can take the training wheels off and I can just see what happens and go with it. And I know that there's going to be some portion of Ruby's audience that will be like, yes, exactly. Let's go.
Yeah. I'm one of them. I've read things that I didn't think I would even enjoy, but it's your voice, I think, and your storytelling. And as you stated before, I don't think I could have put it in the same words that you did, is the idea that you were laying it out little by little and not overwhelming. And I think that's what really did it for me, that like, okay, I am ready to go on another journey with Ruby. What are we doing next? Kind of a thing. So, you touched on it a little bit, the idea that with self-publishing, it can be any length that you want, any way that you want. The story could be unto itself. And that's one of the things that I think with New York constraints, it's a little bit freeing, because you can have the story take shape the way you want it to, rather than, okay, it can only be 80,000 words or whatever. Is there one that you enjoy more than the other, or is it just different?
It's different. I do enjoy the freedom of self-publishing, but there's like stuff that comes with self-publishing that I don't love. Like Amazon will send you like error files, or you have to format things, or like you got a typo on page 30, even though 20 people have been over this book, and this book has been out for 7 years and we're just now noticing it. There's a lot more stuff that you as the author have to do. I feel like when you're self-publishing it, like, where's this cover coming from? Did you get the permissions? Like, are all the stock photos ugly? And like, you can't figure out what you want. Do you like this cover? For one of the books that I self-published, I think the cover changed like 3 or 4 times because the first cover we had, I was like, yes, that's perfect. And all the readers were like, that is the ugliest cover I have ever seen in my life. And I was like, no.
Oh, no.
So then we like tried changing like 1 or 2 things on the cover. And I would see like Reddit threads come up where everybody's like, look at this ugly cover I found. And it's my book. I'm like, oh, no.
Oh.
So you learn the hard way. Whereas like, it's a little more hands-off in New York. Like, yeah, if it has an ugly cover, that was marketing's problem. That's not me. I didn't pick it. I would lovingly craft the fonts and like lay them gently on the page. So, and with New York, you do feel like there's an entire team working on it. There's nothing that's going to squeeze past you. With Bull Moon Rising, that is coming out, not a shameless plug there. No, I literally had copy edits, I want to say like 12 times on that one because I would fix something and it would cause more errors in the book.
Oh, no.
So then they would send me more emails and they're like, okay, what about all the errors on this page? And I'm like, crap. And then I would go in and try and fix it all again. And then there would be more errors because I would keep fixing and keep making more mistakes. So we had like 12 rounds, and your self-published books don't normally get that much loving attention from like 30 people in the editing department. So
it's a good segue into what's coming out tomorrow, in fact, which is Bull Moon Rising. Tell us a little bit about this next amazing project.
It's in hardcover, baby's first hardcover. Totally not nervous at all.
Nice.
It is called Bull Moon Rising. It is fantasy romance, and it is completely standalone. That's just one of my personal bugaboos right now. Right now, it might not bother me in a few years, but right now, I don't like waiting for the next part of the story. So I'm very impatient. Netflix has made me impatient. I want the whole thing at once.
Yes.
So I wanted to create a story that was completely standalone. There will be a second book in the series, but it will be standalone as well. Like, you won't have to read book 2 to understand book 1. But it is in a completely new world. And this is a world that is based on the transaction of magical artifacts from an old civilization. In the current world, everything has been cobbled up and have taken over like all of the land. They're like a little bit like city states. All of the lords answer to a king. And there is one city in kind of in the center of everything that has a guild. And the guild is responsible for finding artifacts and selling them to the lords. And the lords use them to protect their lands or to like show their wealth. Normal people don't normally have artifacts. And so the heroine is a very sheltered, very old money type that lives in one of these lords' keeps. She's the daughter of the lord. And I keep saying the lord. He is a lord, not the lord. But she is Lady Aspeth Honori. And she has just found out that all of their artifacts are gone. Her father gambled them away. And so their home is basically defenseless. And she's like, if anybody else finds this out, we're all doomed. So she's like, she is kind of a scholar and a nerd. So she's like, I know, I'm going to go join the guild and I am going to get us some artifacts and save the day. And so she travels to the city, which is called Vast Warren, which is built on top of the ruins of the first city. And she gets there. She meets the hero, who is Hawk, and he's a Minotaur. He is in the guild. And she's like, yes, I would like to be part of the guild. And he's like, no. And so it kind of starts from there. They have to make a deal to work together so they both get what they want. And he needs a wife because there is the Conquest Moon coming up, which is a time of rut for all Minotaurs. So he would like a wife to help him out in that situation. And she needs a chaperone. And she's like, let's work together. And he's like, do you even know what you're talking about? She's like, no, but let's do it. So that's kind of how the story starts.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
Well, your publicist offered, well, both of us, I don't know if Matt read it, but I absolutely loved the story.
Oh,
and
thank you.
yeah, and I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised because on one hand, again, huge fan of Ice Planet Barbarians, but this was so different, in a good way different, but still the trademark Ruby. Like I said, every once in a while you get those jokes in, and just you saying just now made me giggle that she's totally like, I don't know what that means, but we're going to do it because that's exactly who she is. She's just like, I'm doing this, whether anybody wants me to or not. And here I go. I mean, I loved her as the heroine. She's absolutely fantastic. So I think if you're a fan of Ruby, this book is for you, whether or not. Like, again, I've never read what they're calling, well, first of all, Romantasy, I guess is what this new subgenre is called. I've never delved into that. But monsters, what they're calling the monster fad.
Yes.
So I was a little nervous going in, but really after all of it, I'm just like, why did I even worry? This was Rubyverse.
I told my husband there was going to be a Minotaur in this one. And he's like, Minotaur? Why? I was like, because I can make it sexy.
Yeah. No,
it's going to be fun.
Yes, you did. I mean, giving him the name Hawk, first of all, makes all sorts of like hero vibes off of it, but just no spoilers. We're not going to get into spoilers because, of course, this is coming out tomorrow. But just the idea that this really was, to me, one of those things that, like, when you trust the author to take you on a journey, and it's one that you totally don't expect. Not only did I want to keep the Ice Planet Barbarians organized, because I like to read things in order, but I knew that, and especially after reading this one, I'm right. I want to read them all. I want to read all the different Ruby verses. And so, yeah, I'm just ecstatic about Bull Moon Rising, and I hope everyone goes to get it and enjoys Hawk and Elspeth's story. And again, I didn't think I was going to get taken away the scenery by the world building. But of course, again, going back to Ice Planet Barbarians, I was taken away by the world then too. I mean, it just wasn't. So yeah, you have a gift. You certainly have a gift of creating these places that are just fantastical. And I mean that in the actual meaning of the word, fantastical. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're making me blush. Thank you. I mean, I do try to, I figure if you're picking up a Ruby Dixon book, I want it to have the same sort of vibe every single time.
Yeah.
Like, even if it's set in a completely different world, I want you to have the same sort of, you know what you're getting into when you get the hero and the heroine. Yeah. There's always going to be some humor because I don't take myself seriously at all. And there's probably going to be like some crazy world building because I like to read nonfiction and like pick weird things out of it and then put them in my stories just because I can.
Yeah.
Like for a long time, I was stuck on shipwrecks and naval disasters. I went into a rabbit hole of naval disasters. And so in one of my books, I wrote like a naval, like a 16th century type ship. And I was like, well, how did they use the bathroom on the ship? Well, I'm glad you asked that because there was one bathroom. And it was a hole in the side of the ship. And there was a poop rope. And so you would pull the rope up out of the water, use the end, and then drop it back in. And I'm like, that is the most bizarre thing I've ever heard of. I have to write that in a book. And so it has become legendary in my fans. Somebody will always put something in the comments when I start talking about like all the goofy stuff I'm researching. And somebody will be like, poop rope.
Yeah.
Just to me, that's just a fascinating thing you don't think about. And I'm like, why can't I throw this into my book? Like you wouldn't think you want to read about a poop rope in a romance, but it's like the little details that make it kind of a fun read.
Yeah.
For me,
yeah.
I don't know anybody else.
I think it makes it relatable too, though, right? Like it makes it human.
Yes.
In a way, right? Versus this kind of sterile type of environment where it has to be just so, and like, it just makes it more human because we're all very complex. We're all very chaotic kind of creatures, right? So when you add that kind of whimsy in there, it just makes it better.
Well,
I feel like we all have to laugh at ourselves.
Yeah.
life is messy. So we all need to like be like, look at how terrible this stuff is. And look at how awful it is riding on this ship and riding. Swimming on a ship. No. being on a ship. Yes.
Yep.
Words are hard.
Life on a ship. life at sea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I just think, okay, so that just adds the humor. That just adds, again, more of the depth. That just adds more of the just sheer joy of your writing. I don't go into a Ruby Dixon thinking, okay, let me feel the angst. This is when I go into a Ruby Dixon, I'm like, okay, what fun am I going to have now? And the other thing is, I didn't know half of this stuff that you've written into these books are true. When I get to that story with the poop, I'm gonna just laugh out loud. And but yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I mean, again, that to me says depth. That means you get taken away by the idea of like, oh, well, how does one go on the ship? And then you find out, and that just again, in some way it adds to the authenticity, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But in most ways, it just makes your stories that much more. There's more depth to them. Even now when I'm expecting it, so Full Moon Rising, I was expecting the depth and everything, but I once again, walked away with so much more because it was, like I said, the world felt real to me. And a lot of times when I've tried different sci-fi that I couldn't get through, if you will, I think it was because I just couldn't picture the world that they were living in. But for some reason, yours is so full that I feel it. But that's exactly what you were saying. All that you've talked about for this podcast has just shown me the amount of work and depth that go into this makes it what it is.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I don't want it to, I worry that it sounds like I'm bagging on science fiction and fantasy. I am not. I read it all the time. I have I love it, but it's like I have always felt like whenever I can't get into a book that everybody's like, oh my God, I love this. Read this. You will love it. And I like bounce off of page one because it's throwing so many words at me. I feel like it's a me problem, not the book. And so I guess that's one of the things that I try to solve in my own writing. I try to make it accessible for me because I'm trying to write what I want to read. Ultimately, you're writing what you want to see in the store on the page. Because I know when I first picked up Ice Planet Barbarians again, I had read a book by an indie author, and I believe they I don't know if it's a man or woman's, R. Smith. And they wrote a book called The Last Hour of Gan. And it was this really epic, very, 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 very dark science fiction with a romantic story in it. And I fell in love with that book. And after that, I read absolutely everything I could find in the science fiction romance category. And there just wasn't enough there. And I think that's when a lot of writers start pulling ideas and like, I'm going to have to write this if I want to see it out there. Because when you're writing it, you get to spend all that time in that world with it. That's like the best part of writing, is like you get to live in that headspace. Yeah. And so for me, even with Ice Planet Barbarians and like Full Moon Rising, I was in a hole of like, I was watching archaeology documentaries, reading books about Egypt, the Great Pyramid, archaeologists. They had archaeologists in the time of like, I want to say it was like Ramses the 19th, Ramses the Great, Ramses II, had a son. I want to say maybe it's his 19th son, who was a big archaeologist, because at the time that he was born, which is like 1200 BC, the Great Pyramid was already like 1500 years old.
Oh, gosh.
And so he was like, well, we've got to go and save these historical sites. And you don't think about that there's some ancient Egyptian thinking, oh, no, this stuff is really old and it's ancient even to us. Wow. And so to me, it was really interesting. And that kind of built some of the groundwork for the setting for Bull Moon Rising, where you have people living in this city, and under the city is this old civilization, and everybody's still using stuff from it. So it's like you pull pieces from everything that you read about, that you watch on TV, and you pull it all into like this little happy ball, and then you write it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So,
That's awesome.
just a question. You don't have to give us any details, wink, wink, but you said there's going to be a second one of
There is.
standalone, but separate.
Yes. Same world. Some of the same characters, not the same hero and heroine, because their story is complete in book one.
Yep.
And so it's going to be two of the characters that you do meet one you meet very briefly, one you are very familiar with in book two. And I wanted, it's same sort of setting, same city, same fantasy world, but I wanted somebody else's story.
Yeah.
I don't like it when it takes 5 or 6 books to get to the end. I say I don't like it. I am obsessed with Sarah Moss's books. She has me with every single one, and I will happily read all of her cliffhangers, but it's hard for me to write one and just be like, aha, readers can wait 2 years. I can't do that. I need to wrap it up and give it a little happy bow and then send them on their way.
Well, I can definitely tell you, as I was reading it, I kept thinking, oh, this character has to have more screen time. This character, whereas this character, ooh, is this one going to get a story? Yeah, I mean, I think as romance readers, we've kind of been trained that characters are going to appear. So I'm happy to hear that there's going to be more stories from this universe for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So
that's awesome. Well, again, Bull Moon Rising comes out tomorrow, and it's on bookshelves and ebooks and everywhere, right? So is there anything you want to kind of say to, like, just tell us a little bit about, like, where you might want them to go to find the book, or any special messaging around tomorrow's launch?
Support your indie bookstores. I mean, Barnes and Noble is amazing. Amazon is amazing. However, indie bookstores need your support. There are a bajillion romance-focused indie bookstores. I actually sent a bunch of bookmarks and swag to some of them, like the Ripped Bodice. I sent to, Blush Books. I sent to a couple of different places. So if you have an indie romance bookstore near you, you can always contact them and see if they have swag and book plates. You can contact Story on the Square. They are a partner that I work with. They ship all over the US. They will send you a copy with book plates and bookmarks, because for me, starting out as a Kindle Unlimited author as Ruby, I try to include bookmarks and book plates whenever I can as a way of saying thank you. Thank you for buying a paper copy, because it helps my books stay on the shelves. And if the books are on the shelves, then I get more readers and everybody's happy. Yeah. But indie bookstores, Pantego Books in Arlington will have signed copies. I'm working with them. So you can go on my website and look. I have links to a bunch of different places, but go to a brick and mortar store and $30 down.
Awesome. That's awesome. And of course, we are going to have a link for the book as well to bookshop.org. If you're not familiar with, you get a chance to support your local indie bookstore as well through that. So wherever you can find Bull Moon Rising, you should absolutely pick it up tomorrow, because you're going to love it. We know it. Awesome. So Ruby Dixon, thank you very, very much for joining us. I hope
thank you for having me.
Yes, we loved it. We hope you'll come back again, maybe in the future. Awesome. All right. Well, that is going to do it for us for now. But again, Bull Moon Rising on bookshelves and on your e-readers everywhere tomorrow. So get it now. Read it. Love it. All right. Thank you very much, my dear Christina, as always. Appreciate you. And thank you so much for listening. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email either to matt@writeoutloudpod.com or christina@bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working, what's not working, and what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.